That is, the identity that women possess and the decisions they make will still be shaped by various other social norms. For example, they're still going to be stigmatized as loud, unproductive, screaming, and annoying by men when they're speaking out in the workforce. For example, they still probably have greater religious obligations than men to families and to their husbands, for example. Their families are far more likely to indoctrinate them into not prioritizing individualistic success and therefore not caring about this culture of confidence to begin with than men whose families probably expect them to achieve success in the workforce and become assertive to begin with. So this narrative, as a consequence of all this, selectively applies to groups that are currently in positions of power. Opening opposition says this narrative is one about politics and the identity of minorities. Why is our characterization the dominant portrayal? One, because the info slide states that this motion is framing confidence as crucial to achieving individual success. And obviously, individual success is the most appealing form of professional success, is the most appealing form of narrative that gets propagated for two reasons. One, because the vast majority of people care about professional success, but only a small number of people are radical political activists who actually care intensely about politics in a highly polarized world. The vast majority of people who are not suffering oppression likely doesn't care about individuality and engagement in politics to a large degree. But number two, professional success is just far more important to the vast majority of people because it means it dictates the level of your material well-being, it dictates your social status in society and whether you can put food on the table for your family, whereas political engagement has very marginal impacts for the vast majority of individuals, given that you can't swing elections by your own vote. What is the comparative? First of all, on our side, there's a culture of dissent that's growing in the absence of this narrative. That is, there are calls that glorify democracy, that call for corporate structures to be democratized, that call for people to listen to the opinions of their subordinates or their students, for example. Number two, there's the glorification of compromise in democratic politics that is far greater on our side of the house when people are epistemically more humble and less confident in their own correctness. Number three, you shed more light on figures who demonstrate humility on our side. That is to say, people like scientists who work really hard in one particular field without feeling like they must be right or feeling like they're superior over other individuals. These people that are silent on their side of the house become far more vocal on our side in comparison to the really confident, really assertive people they glorify on their side of the house. Now, let me engage with opening opposition's push on social justice. I have three broad responses. The first response is that the level of social activism you get on both sides is probably broadly symmetric, because minorities have various other justifications for voicing out their demands for change. The narrative that love is love, the narrative that they've been systemically oppressed by governments and suffering is obviously bad, that strikes empathy in the hearts of people who care about suffering, who cannot turn their eyes away from a drowning child, for example. There are calls to end discrimination that probably have very strong legal grounding, which is why on both sides of the house there will be strong pushes for greater social justice and greater progressivism. Furthermore, minorities oftentimes protest on the streets, not because of the confidence narrative, but because they undergo excruciating pain, because for them, daily survival is a challenge, and therefore, when they have too little to lose, the only option they have is to voice out their demands to the government and advocate for change, because that is the most important thing in their lives. That probably doesn't change on either side of the house. But irrespective of that, there are two ways in which we can flip this case by opening government. Firstly, the majority also gets more vocal on their side and more confident on their side. That is to say, white conservatives are also far more assertive in politics. They're far more willing to advocate for their demands and say things like, we must stand up for ourselves. We are the ones getting depressed. They're stealing our jobs and eroding the minds of our children, which is like a less political change on their side. Number two, as we've previously described, politicians are far less likely to compromise on their side because then you're viewed as unconfident and not assertive. So on our side of the house, you're far more likely to pass policies that the critical majority can agree on that is pragmatically beneficial for vulnerable people on the ground, because the most vulnerable people probably are pressured in such a way that it's not likely to be easily resolved by just outing themselves or telling other people about their identity, because other people are still going to resist their identity. The most vulnerable people can only be helped on our side through broad-scale legislative change that occurs in politics as a result of compromise. The final thought, closing.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like, do you think that white guys have a problem with confidence already?
Well, the narrative is we glorify confidence. So presumably in the absence of this, people glorify confidence less, not compromising in politics and trusting your own correctness is less justifiable. How does this impact social structure and personal development? What did Alex tell you? Firstly, we told you that in politics and in corporate structures, there is far more unequal distribution of power on their side. One, because people in leadership positions will prioritize their own decisions and trust that their decisions are correct. Secondly, because this mechanism of confidence hubris is cyclical. That is to say, when you make a decision out of your own will and that decision turns out well, then you attribute all of this success to yourself, you gain even more confidence, and therefore you're even less willing to look to the advice of other people in the future. This is bad because on our side of the house, you get a diversity of perspectives that prevent crazy decisions from being made in corporate structures and in politics that cause things like mass unemployment, bankruptcy, and stuff like that. Whereas on their side of the house, there's no check against one person in position of power just running rogue because they're drunk on power. Second, we told you in terms of personal development, on our side, you're far more likely to listen to those around you and get a diversity of perspectives on whether the goal you're achieving is realistic, on whether you should continue down this path. These are people that can support you, that care about you, that have a much more outsider and objective view than you do as to what your situation is like, and they uniquely support you financially and emotionally on our side when you conform to their decisions. For these reasons, we're very happy to propose.
Sounds like there's a good speech going on. The problem, and the reason why opening government just definitionally cannot win this debate, is that they have never defined what confidence as a word means. They have never defined what their alternative narrative is or what that world looks like. They have never said if this confidence narrative is the status quo or if it is not the status quo. They have set up a terrible model to lead to, hopefully, a good round on the behalf of the other teams here. Now, we're going to do some of that work for them. What is confidence? Confidence is self-assuredness and self-worth. It's a sense of like intrinsic self-value. It's a belief that you and yourself are valuable, that you are able to do certain things. What is the status quo? The status quo does have confidence culture for some people, and it does not have confidence culture for other people. We think that our promotion of confidence culture is something that can be more broadly on a societal level, accessing those people who have historically not been able to access the benefits of confidence or to access the benefits of confidence culture. As our closing pointed out, white men are told to be confident all the time. That's the status quo, but we believe that the promotion of a narrative of confidence is something that expands past that and expands to people who are not generally in that group.
Yeah.
Sure.
They just insulted our model and defined self-confidence with words that are in the info side and then said some people are confident, other people are not. We're opposing confidence as a culture in the status quo that applies to white men. That's what's telling them to be so confident.
Okay, I guess this is the status quo now. I wasn't aware of that. But regardless, let's go into my argument about why confidence is good, which is that this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is going to be my extension, and then I'll get into the points from my partner, and then I'll get into reputation. So, essentially, we believe that confidence serves as a self-fulfilling prophecy in many certain circumstances. Not all, but many circumstances of individual cases and individual attempts at success. Why is that? It's a stereotype saying, but you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. If you don't feel confident enough to go up for a promotion or to apply to a job or to ask someone out on a date, you're never going to have the possibility of getting that opportunity. That is like an infinite amount of possibility that is lost when you lack self-confidence. When you lack the confidence to be able to take risks and take different opportunities, you lack the ability to advance yourself in ways that are going to be long-term beneficial. What does this mean? It leaves individuals always living with regret. When you have low self-confidence, you feel like you're never able to achieve the things that you want to. You're not good enough to try these things. Whereas in our world, even if you miss those attempts, you still have the chance to achieve the certain things that you want to, and you aren't left feeling like a failure. There's also massive lost opportunities that are that occur to people with low self-confidence. We say that we're winning here because this is an incalculable number of losses of possibilities that occur when you have low self-confidence, and because self-hatred is bad, we think it's bad. Now, what they might say in response to this is, sure, you're going to take risks, but those risks are going to be harmful to you because you're going to lose self-confidence when you fail. We say that that's not necessarily true, because the second point, resilience is provided by self-confidence. You get resilience in the face of difficulty. What do I mean by that? When you have a strong sense of self and a strong sense of self-value, you don't feel the same need to be validated by external factors.
Sure.
This is the main difference between openings, characterization or lack thereof, and our characterization here, way down, is that what they say is that we should not have confidence, or confidence culture, I guess. We should not promote confidence. What should we promote? Again, they don't tell us, but my partner tells you that it's a narrative that the only way to succeed is to be conformist, and the only way to succeed is to meet the markers that are deemed by others to be markers of success. Right? The only way to succeed is to get the white picket fence, the high-paying job, the relationships that you're expected to, that is the pathway to success. We believe that the narrative of culture, or the culture of competence, is something that instills one with self-worth and self-value. That's going to be infinitely beneficial because it leads you to be more resilient, it leads you to have a greater sense of self and to be able to go out more on the limb. Now, my partner gives, yeah, sure.
On one hand, you claim that you don't need external validation. However, this narrative comes from external places such as the elite. How do these two things, how are they compatible?
Yeah, so that is going into my partner's points. What my partner was saying is that the people who are most impacted by cultural narratives are those people who are young or developing their identity. There are moments where they need something to turn to, right? We say that those people are lacking in self-confidence, that they need some kind of external validation in the form of a narrative or the belief that they are enough in themselves. That narrative might come externally, but believing that you are enough in yourself is something that is internal. That's not a contradiction. My partner tells you that this is a method that has been used by many minority communities to be able to become more self-confident. We can look at movements like body positivity, or we can look at movements like disability pride. These are all movements that focus on finding value and finding worth in your own body, in the way that it looks, the way that it functions, and not feeling shame about that, despite what other people might want to say. They say that politically the way that people function is that they are functioning on the idea of daily survival. But the thing is, representation does matter. And we say that self-confidence is a form of representation, right? If you feel more confident in yourself, if you feel confident in your identity, you're more likely to express that. We can see this with things like Harvey Milk's Everyone Come Out movement, which was based on the idea that when more people are aware that they know gay people, the amount of agreement with gay people and gay rights improves. We say that that's going to be critically important here. Then, let me get to my opponent's points. So, my opponents have a couple of points here. Their main point is that confidence is defined by the elites. We say that that is a failing model of confidence when the info slide specifically says self-assuredness. We think self-assuredness is unique and is going to operate independently from external validation. That's kind of definitionally confidence. If you are only confident when you're winning, you don't have self-confidence. That's not something that's functional. They also make the claim that you get better decision making in political negotiation. This is kind of ridiculous, right? The people who are most impacted by culture and the cultural narratives, as we said, are people who are still developing their identity. Political cases aren't cases of individual success. We think that compromise can be built on the basis of confidence. When you see that you have value, you're more likely to see that other people have value. You're more likely to believe in your self-worth and your ability to make reasoned decisions. You're more likely to not engage in a really defensive and reactive manner where you feel like you're being attacked personally because you have enough confidence to be able to be resilient in the face of that kind of language. We say that at the end of the day, these ideas about, and then they say your black women are going to be stereotyped as angry black women if they're confident. Should black women not be confident? What are they implying here when they say that there's still going to be harmful narratives? Sure there are, but we say that intrinsically, at the end of the day, we provide more opportunities and more self-worth. Thank you.
Alright, thank you for that speech, member of parliament. This is good with everyone? I think this debate kind of just suffers from logic and an understanding of where this narrative comes from a little.
Because the first mistake that Opus makes is just making sweeping general claims that have nothing to do with emotion. I.e., opposition conflates having confidence with confidence culture without actually explaining how confidence culture manifests, and by the specific and likely manifestation of confidence culture is something that we should uniquely value and is something that leads to the benefits that opening opposition talks about. OG talks about, oh, this narrative is inaccessible and some people who have the CEO's emails and men have access to this narrative more than other people like gender minorities. But Pano, I just want you to think about this realistically. That's literally all narratives in the world. All narratives, all opportunities in society are structurally unequal, and so I do think opposition's attacks on OG are quite fair. That if women are told they are angry, they will be labeled angry anyway. If connections drive success in terms of you having the CEO email, you are likely to have the CEO email on either side and succeed on either side. So the margin on OG is quite unclear. But I think where OG is correct is explaining who are the people who manifest this narrative, but they never explain what the impact is in terms of why that specific manifestation hurts people. And that's where we're going to enter this debate on closing government. But the second overall mistake that opening government makes is going on wild societal impacts. This impacts the way politicians negotiate. This impacts activism and democracy. But I would suggest politicians want to negotiate with each other because potentially there might be centrist politicians and they actively care about what their voters want and they want to deliver policy on the ground. Democracy exists because of socio-economic factors, because people are fucking tired of not having a voice and not having like money and whatnot. So I just think all of OG's impacts are quite general. What we're going to explain is that all people are relatively on the comparative of opposition less successful in achieving their individual goals, so confidence culture is actively contradictory to what it's set out to achieve. This assumes like this impacts literally everyone, men, women, people who are rich, people who are poor. The first thing I want to do within this extension is explain what the source of this narrative is. And I think OG is partially correct. This comes from people who are richer. Especially, I think this comes and is manifested through social media by people like Andrew Tate, as PM correctly points out. Entrepreneurs who are quite rich, who constantly produce these short reels and have these big fan followings where people develop parasocial relationships with them, watch their YouTube videos and so on, and all they tell you is that you need to believe in yourself. There are two specific things I want to note about the manifestation of this narrative. The first thing is, often the people who actively propagate this do this for a living, such as social media influencers, or even rich people who are not on social media, but for example are businessmen who actively want to increase their brand image and so on. And as a result, they have incentives to be super sensationalistic, often because social media people have less attention spans, but also there are so many other narratives, there are so many other people, so you're competing with all those people for limited attention. As a result of them being super sensationalistic, they are likely to resort to very simple means of communicating this narrative, i.e. saying, I believe in myself, I picked myself up from the bootstraps, I was born with nothing, and what you need is that hustle inside you. What you need is that confidence inside you, and you can also be like me. You can also make an 8-figure salary in the world if you just believe in yourself and assert yourself against everyone else who's a beta. But the second way in which this manifests is that these people, as OG correctly points out, are super privileged, but they never explain what this means. Because often, to make their own stories personal, to make these super privileged rich people more relatable, what they do is they talk intrinsically about their own life and their own story. So, for the average, median person who is watching this, the benchmark for success is often what this person has achieved. The benchmark for success is often what I want what this millionaire has. I want this fancy car, I want this fancy house. And that becomes the benchmark because these influencers and businessmen often talk about themselves and how they got here because that uniquely makes them more personal and relatable, and therefore to the average person, this is what the benchmark becomes. What is the impact of this? The first is, this narrative is fucking misleading, and I can't stress this enough. Because obviously, we recognize that some people are more skilled than other people, some people have more opportunities than other people to succeed. What this necessarily means is, people often are misled that all they need in order to achieve their goals is that self-assertiveness, is that will and that hustle and that confidence, and if you have that, you can reach any level. But I would point out that when on their side of the house, when most people think this is the only key to success, that you just need to have confidence and grind it out for a 6-figure salary, you ignore other things that are much more real in terms of you actually achieving your goals. One, it's literally just fucking raw luck in terms of where experiences you have, what kinds of structural inequities you face. But even within that context of you being disprivileged, often within that context, i.e. like, sure, you might not become a millionaire, but you could become richer, could provide for your family. Even that depends on two critical things. One is support structures, and this is really important. Often you have to depend on other people. You need, for example, your friend to tutor you because you don't understand this concept super well. Or you need, for example, to help, like somebody's help to prepare for an interview that might actually change your life. But the second is active effort. It's not about all confidence and self-assertiveness and thinking that all I need is that hustle, like all that confidence inside me, and if I just presume myself as confident, everything's going to come in. You actually need to do lots of hard work. You need to put in lots of effort. And I think these two things are unlikely to happen on their side because of my prior analysis that these influencers tell you that all you need is confidence. Before that,
You just said that hustle culture is bad, but people need to work harder. But regardless of that, the point that you're making here that like people are going to be less successful, like what is the alternative narrative? Can you please tell me what the alternative
Awesome.
narrative is?
There are two alternative narratives that we have. And to be clear, my point is, on their side, people think confidence is all they need, self-assertiveness is all they need, and that's enough to achieve their goals. On our side, two things happen, and this fills in the OG link on what the comparative is, because I think that's a fair point towards opening opposition. The first is, people are much more likely to depend on other people on our side of the house, and they are more likely to ask for help. Now, OG says you don't negotiate because you don't take criticism, but our claim is much more active, that you don't actively, like, I don't go to Sharia and be like, okay, I'm massively struggling with this speech, I really need something, I have nothing in prep, because I am incentivized on their side to just self-assert myself, being like, yeah, I understand this extension, I'm going to run it perfectly. So people are much more likely to ask for others for help, which helps in achieving their own goals. But second, people are much more likely to put in more effort, because on their side, you are likely to overinflate your skill and have benchmarks that realistically you cannot reach. On our side of the house, academically what this means is, you actually put in effort to study for hours for your SAT score, or you actually grind for the interview instead of saying all I need is some confidence. The comparative therefore is significantly better. We just lead to more successful lives. This narrative is contradictory to everything that opening opposition supposes. I'm very proud to propose.
Alright, thank you, member of government, for that speech, member of opposition.
Fair. If you could just POI by raising your hand, that would be great. You don't need to say that. The problem with opening half is that neither team is able to find a meaningful delta because the impacts they try to claim are absurdly huge. OG says that confidence culture, and they've already been clowned on a lot by CG, so I'll be very brief here, but OG says that confidence culture makes people who are currently confident worse and convinces minorities to follow the harmful stereotypes. On making, like, white guys worse, I think the problem with this is that the harms they identify don't come from people feeling empowered to be confident through confidence culture. I think the first thing here is that if you are a white male who, through the narratives of white supremacy and male supremacy, is not punished for failing, whether it's by treating people poorly or not doing particularly well in a job, I think you come about this confidence anyway. It isn't confidence culture that empowers you, it is your own material success. I think the second thing here is that even if you don't buy that analysis, and perhaps, women in our world get talked over more in the workplace a little bit, I think the worst impacts that they try and grasp at still probably happen because of the really powerful culture of capitalism, right? You still don't get women promoted to high positions because it is that men believe that they will take maternity leave or get married and leave those positions more quickly. I think these sort of endemic problems continue to exist with or without confidence culture, and their impacts end up being quite marginal. And I think that OO calls them out. Oh, sorry. The other thing that they say is that this makes minorities worse off. I think that there exist harmful and beneficial stereotypes, kind of no matter what you do. Women get lambasted for being quiet and unambitious as much as they do for being loud. I also think that being a powerful woman does allow you to play into some kinds of stereotypes, like Kamala Harris being like, yeah, I'm a cop. Not sure how great of a narrative that was morally, but it certainly seemed to work for her. And I think OO is right in calling OG out, but ends up falling into the same problem, right? I don't think a lack of confidence is why social movements end up failing, or why it is that people are discriminated against in workplaces or in their lives, right? I think that this is, again, for the narratives of white supremacy and patriarchy, the things that actually really lead to people being discriminated against. Our extension is not as high impact as for math, but we're actually going to prove it. It's that relationships are more successful when people are affected by confidence culture. Here's the problem, that there are strong incentives for people in relationships, men, women, whatever, to keep feelings to themselves. I think that this comes from two main narratives that we want to countervail with confidence culture. First, that both men and women shouldn't have needs. So, for example, as a man, your duty to your wife is to provide for her, and that you shouldn't expect for her to cater to you emotionally, and as a woman, that you shouldn't ask men for things because, by dating you, they are doing enough to begin with by, providing for you economically or whatever else. And I think the second narrative is that your partner should just be able to anticipate your needs, right? That it isn't a good or right relationship if I feel that Jonah isn't buying me dinner enough, and he can't magically tell that is a problem that I'm experiencing. And I think what confidence culture does is that it countervails those narratives. Here's what's crucial. These are actually pretty easy narratives to break out of, right? I don't think that they come from, the strong kind of capitalist incentives that make people sexist, that make people, homophobic and racist, right? I think the reason why those problems exist is because it's really in the interests of elites in society to discriminate against women, right? Because they are untalented cis white men. They want to make sure that no one else can get to their status. I think when it is that you are in a relationship, in the vast majority of cases, both people actually want the relationship to succeed. I think what's getting in the way are people's own thoughts and anxieties, and that confidence culture actually allows them to overcome. Your partner doesn't have capitalist incentives, whereas the elites do. I think we probably don't find a margin on abusive relationships, right? If you're in a terrible relationship where you're being really terribly mistreated, that probably will happen on either side of the house. But I do think that we make good relationships better and last longer, and we make even relationships that are a little bit shitty, slightly less toxic. I think when it is, please just raise your hand. I think when it is that you feel empowered to make your voice heard with your partner, when it is that you are rewarded for being a sort of kind of in the rest of your life, even if this isn't particularly successful professionally, even if you are more sort of in the workplace and you don't get that promotion, you are able to go to your partner and say, Jonah, please, I need you to buy me dinner or clean the house more often. I'm used to debating with my boyfriend, if you can't tell. I think that this is a really good thing. I'm going to tell you then why. I think, first of all, it's a wrong characterization for government to say that what people care about most is their professional careers. I think actually in most of the world, the main goal that we see in media is to fall in love and get married and have kids, right? And I think people's partners tend to be their main emotional supports, right? They're your favorite person, the person who's most important to you. And I think if you feel the frustration of not being able to express yourself to them, if they aren't meeting your needs, if you're getting, if you're in a relationship that just feels okay and you feel prevented from actually expressing yourself to them, I think that that is something that has a really negative impact on your quality of life. I'm going to tell you about why CG is wrong. We'll take opening first.
Wait, I'm confused. On your side, everyone in a relationship thinks they're right. So you have your very first fight and you just break up because you always think you're right.
That's a great question. So I actually think that people are more mature than hearing a different view and being like, no, fuck you, kill yourself, right? I actually think that it is probably better for couples to fight for two reasons. First, if that fight is constructive, they can actually improve their relationship. They can ensure that they are meeting each other's needs better. I think if both people in a relationship have positive intentions, that's what happens. But I think the second thing that happens if you get in a fight, or indeed if you make your feelings heard to your partner and they don't listen to you, is you break up with them, right? You notice red flags in your relationship much more quickly. If you say, Jonah, I really need you to clean the house more, and he's like, no, I don't care, right? I think that you are able to get out of that relationship much more quickly. I think that that means that you have a better, more fulfilling life. Now I want to lastly talk about CG. I think CG is an incredibly simplistic and reductive case. They say, people are going to follow Andrew Tate, they're not going to do any work, they're going to expect to prosper. I have two responses to this. Response number one, if you are someone who is looking for a get-rich-quick scheme, you're going to find one with or without confidence culture. They need to prove a tipping point on why confidence culture is such a particularly powerful thing that gets people to not do the requisite amounts of hard work. I don't think that they've been able to do that. I think if confidence culture doesn't exist, they probably invest in terrible investment schemes, or decide that some other, they become really beautiful because they think that they're going to be celebrities, right? I don't think that confidence culture is particularly powerful here. But I think the second thing here is that there are actually pretty strong countervailing narratives against the kinds of things that Andrew Tate puts out, right? Like, universities have billion-dollar endowments that they use to advertise, both in classrooms and like in the media, how important academic education is. I think there are also tons of hustle culture influencers who say, yeah, the way to be successful is actually to work very hard and to network. And so there are all of these other influences that actually kind of countervail the competence culture from the very specific influencers that CG cites. I think we're the only side to prove something, that's why we win.
Alright, thank you, member about government.
Oh, my brain too. Solidarity.
Sorry, I hope we just stop you speaking.
I didn't start.
Two parts of this speech. The first, how does this affect the individual, which is probably the most important thing in this debate because it's proximate to them. Secondly, on society. The first thing I want to do is I want to ask a very basic question. Are people strictly confident or strictly underconfident? Because these guys claim that people actually have a lot of faith in themselves. There are already a lot of organic ways you would want to be confident. Makes some sense. They come up and say, no. People second guess themselves all the time. They're not comfortable within their skin. So people are strictly underconfident or usually underconfident. Henceforth, the need for this. I'm helping you guys. So the question is, what is true? Probably both of them. Because the fact of the matter is, if you just take an individual or just yourself, you are neither strictly confident or strictly underconfident. You might be very confident in the school that you go to, but you might not be very confident when you go back home for whatever reason. You might be perfectly comfortable when your math teacher might come in, but you're not comfortable in the other class that you go to. What is important to understand is that there is no such thing as someone being strictly underconfident or strictly confident. So the question then is, what does this culture actually do? And that's what we showed you as closing government. Which is to say, individuals, vis-a-vis their experiences, vis-a-vis failure, vis-a-vis the friends that they have, family that they have, and all the support structures that exist, are likely to develop ways to find and develop methods that are compatible with their personality as to how they want to achieve their goals. That is to say, when you go through failure once, twice, or thrice, you try to understand how it is that I can create a better path for myself. You reach out to your teachers, you might reach out to your friends, those that are near you. The point is, people organically do develop ways to develop confidence, but what is critical to understand is they are developing ways that conform to their existing personality, and they don't need to alter themselves fundamentally. What then does their world do on opposition bench? Their world fundamentally creates a hyper-culture that you ought to be confident right now, that you ought to access Hustlers University or whatever the hell exists out there in terms of getting the strength that you need and to assert yourself. Why is that uniquely bad? It's bad not because you're just throwing confidence out there, but what you're doing is you're taking an external source that is telling you how to be confident through their experiences and it is pushing it onto you. That may or may not conform to your personality, but because it is a culture, because it is being done by people who are in power, because it is being done by people that society would unanimously and traditionally consider to be successful people, you believe that the ways to be confident are the ways that they are telling you. And the reason this is problematic, and this is the prereq that we demonstrate, is that insofar, and like this is I suppose a buy-in claim, but the idea is that insofar as your personality does not conform to the sort of experiences that are being told upon you, you're unlikely to actually acquire the sort of skills that they're trying to instill in you to be confident. What this then means is that any and all efforts that you're likely to do when you're getting the confidence from this external source and it is not compatible with your own personality is that you have to fundamentally A, change yourself at its base, or you just simply blindly follow. In either scenario, what is happening is that the individual is conforming to an external source that has never met them, that has never seen them, that does not know who these people are, and you are buying into it. But you might ask, Why are people so naive? Why will they do it? Consider the fact that 5 to 6 years ago, the word NPC didn't exist. The word alpha and sigma didn't exist. These are words that you've seen come out in society through startup culture, through Jensen Huang telling people that I work in my sleep and I work when I'm eating as well. This is the problem, because the people that are shoving it down your throat are fundamentally people that are different. So yes, OG is right, they are privileged, but what is critical is there is a divergence of experience, which means that the buy-in you get could be massive, could be towards women as well, but it is unlikely to be successful. The comparative then is not this demonization of confidence, because you yourself say that confidence is something society already kind of likes. The comparative is people develop organic ways to actually find out what is realistic, what can actually bring them confidence. Simply speaking, for me, it was just literally understand that I need to breathe in through my nose and breathe out through my mouth. That was enough for me to understand that's what I need to do before a speech. The point is, this is how people naturally converge to a preference that aligns with them. But I would also want to know, and this is something OG hints at but never proves, which is to say that the people that are trying to sell you this, that are trying to show to you that you should be confident, the people that are making the money off of this in social media or through these algorithms, are individuals who actually don't have an incentive for you to succeed. Because insofar as your success happens, you have no incentive to go back to them. You have all the reason to retain these people because you want to constantly instill confidence in them. You want to become their self-help guru because there is the people that will help you. As a consequence of that, the people that are pushing this narrative down have no incentive for you to become successful, because if you do, A, that is a taking away of the share of the pie that they have access to, but more critically, it is something that takes away from them. As a consequence of that, we think individuals are likely to shoot way too high, beyond their means, and as a consequence of that, account for failure more. So if the one mantra down opposition bench is that people will fail and they don't understand, they are the side that makes people more prone to failure, because you're telling people things that are beyond their natural abilities, or things that people cannot actually do. As a consequence of that, people are likely to account for failure far more on their side of the house. For that, hope.
Yeah, when people are confident, they're better able to be role models of non-normative identities. Please explain why these movements for confidence, like body positivity, like disability justice, and like the Hardy No coming out movements, why are those not based on confidence?
No, I'm so sorry, but to be confident does not mean that I bought into confidence culture. When somebody in the 1970s was fucking protesting on the street, it was not because they felt confident in themselves, it was because they felt confident in the community. And this is the critical point. On their side, you instill this sort of individualism within people, and as a consequence of that, you are unlikely to reach out for the help. And this is critical, panel, because no goal, procedurally speaking, is strictly solo. Every goal requires you to interact and talk to people around you. Their work fundamentally posits the claim that those NPCs are distractions, that if you're not an alpha and you're seeking out for help, that's somewhat a detriment to yourself. As a consequence of that, individuals who need the help the most, i.e. minority individuals, are less likely to seek out help, not just from majority people, but also from people within. So as a consequence of that, you have factioning of less vulnerable communities on their side of the house. What then is the weighing? The weighing is simple. We can bite the bullet. You might get a bit more confident on our side a bit late. That's fine. Because even if it's coming a bit late, it's something that conforms to who you are. You don't need to fundamentally change yourself, and you are more comfortable in your skin. Because as Kostab explains to you, you create a benchmark that is already unrealistic. You keep trying to get to the benchmark, but you consistently fail. There is no problem in being underconfident or confident. Most people lie in the middle. This culture compels people to become something they are not, and that is deeply, deeply troubling. We are very proud.
Alright, you can go for that topic.
Oh shit! I thought the tomato was over, I'm so sorry. They told me they would give me a room with AC, I'm sorry to have heat stroke. Apologies to our back.
I think Closing Gov presents a little bit of a strange case, because they're telling you that confidence culture exists exclusively from this certain kind of influencer that is specifically bad. But I think that we actually have a much broader understanding throughout the rest of the debate about what confidence culture actually is, which is just that we believe that in society, confidence and self-assuredness and self-actualization are things that broadly should be valued. Now, it is true that there are methods with which that is pursued, whether that is through influencers is the example they gave. But that doesn't mean that that is the exclusive way that confidence is perpetuated in society if it is viewed as a virtue. It also means things like, going to your therapist and then telling you that that is actually good if you are assured of yourself, and you are good if you are confident. Things that you hear from your friends, self-help books that you read. It's unclear why we have to discard the entire narrative because of some influencers that they think are problematic, and why those exist uniquely on our side, and why this idea, I'll take you later. Specifically, I think that their idea falls by the very analysis that they give you at the top of their speech, which is that largely there are big societal incentives for a lot of things. Like people, if they see successful people within a capitalist society, will try to emulate those people. They will try to do the same things. That is generally that is a self-evident thing that is not in any way proven to do specifically with confidence culture, and within their own characterization of confidence culture, clearly existed before kind of this new wave that they characterize as what confidence culture is. So clearly, their impacts are not that important here. This is what's crucial in this round, because we are the only team to actually prove anything, which is that on an individual level, on a very on a very proximate level, your relationships with other people and your romantic relationships get better when you voice what you actually believe, when you voice what you actually think. Let's go deeper into this, because actually I'll take the POI first.
We prove that confidence makes people less likely to introspect and listen to others, and makes them worse in relationships and in the workforce. CG repeats it, and CO doesn't rebut this.
Yeah, so let's get into that. Let's talk about this, the only class really on relationships within this round, which is this diagram. What do we hear from opening government? They tell you that you're less likely to listen to other people. But here's the thing. First of all, we would tell you that people have other incentives other than just being confident or not confident. That is true. So, people still want to preserve the relationship. There still is a margin here. But the point is that they offer a lot of analysis, for example, about listening to friends, about doing all these things. But the point is that these are predicated on the fact that your friends will feel comfortable to speak up, that will be seen as a virtue, that you get a diversity of opinions as they talk about in politics is predicated on the idea that a diversity of people are willing to speak up, and that's seen as a good thing. So let's go more deep into opening government's case, because I'll take you later. I'll take another minute. So the problem with opening government's case is a fewfold. The first thing is that they tell you that you get a completely different set of politics on their side. I think that the problem here is that one, they do not prove this. They do not prove that you get more that the specific mechanisms here are more important than normal political operation. That this overpowers this. And I already gave you the analysis of why on our side there's the pretty likely claim that if people are more comfortable speaking out, then this is actually better on their side. But what is the essentially wrong thing about opening government? The problem with them is that they tell you they largely just are completely uncomparative, because they tell you that this harms minorities specifically, but the problem is that this is symptomatic of a system where other people are in power, where there's a dominant culture, rather than a specific to this narrative. They give you the example of a minority being criticized for being or a black woman being criticized for being too vocal or too assertive. But it's unclear how that gets better on our side if confidence is not seen as a virtue. Clearly, if confidence is seen as something good, that marginal case gets better on our side, or your ability to ask for promotion might get better on our side. These are somewhat marginal, we agree, although they fall on our side, but at least the very real thing of the interpersonal relationships, which are outside of this paradigm of larger structures, gets better on our side, and that's literally the only thing that has been proven in this debate.
Our extension is that the problem is this narrative. It can come from your family as well, but when self-assertiveness is the most important thing and that's what's emphasized, you undervalue the amount of effort it takes to achieve the goal and the amount of support you need from your friends, from other people to achieve those goals. That impact is clear and standing in this.
So let's talk about it. So first of all, I think that this is a pretty I think that they are engaging for some reason in a world where this is the only narrative that exists, where this exists in a vacuum. All we are saying is that it is good if society views confidence as a virtue. It doesn't mean that the only thing you have to do is be confident. It doesn't mean that it's the single most important value. Obviously, people will value some things over others due to personal experience, due to like cultural factors. We're just saying that broadly, it is a cultural. It would be greater if it was seen as a cultural virtue, not that it is the only good thing. But the problem with their analysis is that it is largely about. Well, first of all, there are really two big problems. The first is that it is largely analysis about why narratives generally are coercive in society. The problem here is that like narratives exist on their side as well. So people are told what to do on their side as well. They're societally, they're socially sanctioned for certain actions based on culture. It is unclear why this specific thing then is like so harmful in society because it's like not a realistic vision of like how you achieve success. I think that all like narratives are generally fall into the same category where they are like kind of approximations of virtuous things, right? Like, you know, you can believe that confidence is good, but you are still like acclimated to your own personal experience, what that means to you, and what that looks like to you. They kind of like they kind of fly in the face of this when they say that like, you know, the narrative is inherently not true and therefore bad. But I think there are really two problems in this, which is that the first is that it's uncomparative. They don't tell you, for example, like if you, what the comparative, like I think that the problem here is that if you have no basis of like, you know, self-fulfillment on their side or self-actualization on their side, at least we give you a way to be confident and to be self-actualizing. Like they don't tell you what alternative there is on their side for the ability to like actually like, you know, like go forward within your own life if you are in a marginalized community, for example. So I think this is the most important thing. But largely, they did not at all touch, and this is incredibly important, they did not touch on our point about relationships. It goes unresponded to. And insofar as the most tangible impact in this round, the only thing that you can actually say impacts the people, like and all people who experience relationships, we have to take this round proud to.
Alright, thanks. I'll break up until 6:08. Please cross worship, pins and leaves.
Good round. Good round.